with everything going over there. So we're in Romans 5, and we've talked a whole lot about the way, the cost of sin, the wages of sin, righteousness, who's righteous, who's not righteous. We talked a whole lot about that. And now we get to Romans 5, and we're going to talk a little more about perseverance, hope, and all those things tonight. And I tell you what, these 5 verses are very, very intense. And honestly, 4 of the 5 are the ones that are really intense. And we're going to break them down, have some really good conversation. I've been doing the same study with our small group on Sunday morning, and we did this Sunday, and we had a really good conversation. So here we go. We start in verse 1. It says, "Therefore, since we have been declared righteous by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ." And as we look at this and we see there's this idea that we are able to be righteous, and righteous, living rightly, be righteous, seen, and more importantly, seen by God as righteous. That's the key element there. That happens through faith through Jesus Christ. I mean, I basically just read that verse and said the same thing that verse said. So this is more of a therefore, here we go. Based off of everything we said, talking about righteousness and faith, you get this. Then you move on to some of the meat of our passage today, which is verse 2. And this is a great marriage, if you will, a harmony of the Hebrew study that we did last year. Also some other passages that we studied in the past. But we're really going to dive into this verse and some other verses here tonight. So it says here that we have obtained access, right? And as we look at this and we begin to understand when it talks about access here, and I got to take this off and put that on. There we go. But we've obtained access through God. So think about that. This idea of access, we have the ability to access God. Okay? How do you wrap your head around the idea of having the ability to access God? How do you picture that? Okay, we learn and we access to God through that, right? And so, what's some other things that we have ways to access God? We have access to God through faith, but how do you see God? I mean, how does that access to God? How do you have a visual? I mean, I know you said through Bible and through reading, but that's sort of the how or ways to understand God. But how do you visualize that? What does that look like to you? Right, I'm going to call names here if we don't start talking. So.
Well, my translation says peace with God.
Okay.
So, I guess it means, we're talking about somebody who's been saved by their faith in Jesus Christ.
Right.
We're talking about somebody who has the Holy Spirit living within them, someone who's been an adopted child of God.
Right.
So, I just see that whole package in my mind when you say that.
Yeah.
Access to God. You suddenly are not just His creation, but you're His son or daughter. You're part of the family. You're saved. You're the whole thing. In a nutshell. Is what
Right. What were you saying?
I was going to say I don't visualize. I feel it more. Like I feel His Spirit and feel Him.
Okay.
More than I'd say I visualize it. Because I don't really picture what God looks like. I just
that makes
feel
sense.
His presence and feel Him.
Well, think about it this way. When we ask a question about this idea of access, I'm pulling in a lot of Hebrews here when it says that we have access to the throne room of God, and through Jesus Christ. So and we know that Hebrews was written by someone who had a lot of influence by Paul. Paul very much influenced the writer of Hebrews. We're not very sure. It could have been Paul. It could have been someone else. It could have been half Paul and half someone else. We don't know when it comes to who wrote Hebrews. But when we see this, we know this is Paul writing this letter to the Romans. And he's talking, and we see this idea of access God. I think, in the image I was painting to, the class the other day and to you all, is think about, sometimes you have access somebody or they're in the room, but doesn't mean like you have that relationship with him though. Where was I the other? The last couple weeks ago, I was in New Orleans for a class, right? And so where we were walking around the entire city trying to find a place to eat, and nobody's open. I mean, nothing is open. It's all closed because of COVID. They were in major lockdown. This was just 2 weeks ago, and so we walk up and there's this place called Mother's, which is a breakfast joint. They do have some seafood and stuff, but it's very, very, very small place to eat. And so nowhere to really, and we're like, wow, breakfast does sound good. Breakfast always sounds good. I mean, it's breakfast. So, but that we decided not to eat there. But we thought it was very interesting that as we're walking by, the entire staff is standing outside, and all of a sudden here comes people who were eating are like saying, and they're like, thank you for eating. I was like, man, are they so hurt for business that they just literally thank everybody who comes in to eat, right? And, then all of a sudden I look over and I see who it is. And it's Robert Irvine. I don't know if you know who that is. He's the guy who's on like Restaurant Impossible. He's on the Food Network. Really big, bulky, strong guy, huge guy. And here he comes out with his whole crew. They're redoing a restaurant in the New Orleans area. And so he walks out of this restaurant, and my friend who I was with was like, hey, that's Robert Irvine. It's like, yeah, it is Robert Irvine. And then all of a sudden, and I'm thinking like, I don't want to be that guy. And what I mean by that is like, I'm not going to be that guy that goes up to him and says, hey, will you do this? But my friend's like, he's like, I got it. It's like, hey, can I take a picture with you? And it's like, so now I become the picture taker for him. But, I think about that in scenarios like that where like, imagine you sitting in the restaurant and you see, someone who you respect, someone who's there, they're in the same room. You have access to them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a relationship. What I mean by, how am I trying to say this? You can have a relationship with God. You can be in the same room with God and still be disconnected. Does that make sense? Think about it this way. You're in the same room. We've had this happen before. Kathy's on the couch. I'm on the love seat. I'm doing some work. She's doing some work. We are in the same room together. We have access to each other, but we are so far from each other mentally that we're not connected with each other. And I think the thing is, we do have access with God, but I'm not sure if we always take advantage of that access.
The other thing is, access doesn't mean equality.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we're on the same level.
Right.
You can have access to someone, you can be in their presence, but he's still God, or they're still the president.
Right.
And whatever level you want to put it, you may be in the room with them, be able to actually wave and speak to them, but they're not the same.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference. I understand what you're going. I mean, we always got to have that healthy, reverent fear of God. I mean, recognize that's God, But the idea, though, is that just as much we have that reverent fear, when Jesus was teaching to pray, and then he goes on and he shows us how he prays. He says, Abba, Father. Now, in the Lord's Prayer, he doesn't use Abba, but other times, and even Paul goes along to talk about us calling God Abba, as Jesus called him, which Abba means daddy. So it's that concept that we have an intimate relationship. So yes, we have that reverent fear because we have access. But even then, I mean, I think, child and a daddy or child and a parent like that, you're not equal to them, but there is an intimacy there. And I think sometimes we miss that intimacy. Maybe, and I think what you're bringing up, maybe that fear, maybe we fear them so much we fail to have the intimate relationship. I tell you what, I think a lot of Christians struggle with that. I think they put God on such a high pedestal, which he deserves to be there, but they forget the fact that Jesus was sent so that we could have a relation and be connected with God. And so we lose that concept that we're supposed to be able to draw near to God, embrace God, have intimacy with God, and we put him up there and we never have a real relationship with him. Now, I understand there's a thin line there, though, too. With having a relationship with God, it's not like God's your buddy that you're fist bumping and saying, let's go hang out this week. That's not the kind of relationship that God is talking about here. But one thing this talks about, we only have access through God through faith. And that's what it says here. Access by God, right? Through faith. But here's the thing. Not only is it through faith, but it's through faith into this grace in which we stand. And I think this idea of grace is a big issue here. This grace that we stand, that we get to stand in this grace that God provides for us, that God bestows upon us. In His presence, it's almost like, you've heard the expression, my sister always says this, I'm so glad I got to grace you with my presence, is what she says. But it's like, we get to be there. We get to relish in that. We get to soak up as much as we can with that. But as we see this, that we, through faith, have access to God, and in that access to God, we get to stand in that grace. We get to stand in the fact of that God is there. Now, to describe what that grace feels like, right? It's almost like here is God who literally is just hugging us, right? He is wrapping His arms around us, letting us how much He cares, letting us know how much He wants to be a part of us, and so on and so on. So that is a huge concept of when we talk about what grace is and the ability to have that grace in there. All right, anyway, so we'll jump right back in it. So we've talked about this idea of because through faith we can access God, but we get to access and be in His grace. And I think that's something like when you're, there's just sometimes when you're in God's presence and it's just like that ooey, gushy, mushy feeling that you get of just like, I could just take that for the rest of the day, right? And that's the kind of hope that we have, that we can be with God and know that we can be loved and experience His presence that way. I think that's huge for us to see and huge for us to understand that is there for us to do all of that. But it says, and we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. We're going to talk more about this idea of hope. So before we do that, let's jump on over to the next verse. And that's verse 3. And this is when the rubber meets the road, folks. So this is when it gets a little hairy. It is. It says this. And not only that, right? But we also rejoice, and I don't know if I can highlight this 1,000 times. Rejoice, right? We're going to rejoice in our afflictions, right? Let me press that, try that again. We'll try this one more time. My pencil has died. This is why Chad needs a new iPad pencil. But we're going to rejoice in our afflictions. When was the last time that you had an affliction and you're like, praise the Lord for this affliction, because this is what it says. Not only do we get to relish and to sit in God's grace, but on top of that, we actually get to rejoice in affliction. Someone explain to me how we ever can rejoice in affliction. Anybody got an idea on that?
Everything always happens for a reason, is what I say.
Yeah?
God's reason, but everything always happens for a reason.
That is
to be teach somebody else or to teach you.
And I agree with that. And I think we'd all would sit there and say that that's a part of it.
Keeps us humble.
Yes, it very much does. Very much does. And I think, everything does happen for a reason. It does keep us humble. But if we're really going to be truly honest with ourselves, I don't think any of us are going to sit there and go, when that bad thing does happen, we're not going to sit there and go, man, I'm so thankful that this happened to me today. It's like Now, can you see in retrospect times where, man, I am so thankful. What's that? Oh, hey, Richard. I am so thankful that this happened or not. I can't turn it off. So, what's that? I can, but then it won't sync. So, like I said, I'm trying something new, and right now it's not working. So, but
Rejoicing?
I'm not rejoicing right now because the new program that they're coming out with, which allows me to used to I would be able to do this great, but the new program that's coming out, the update, if you will, won't let me do this anymore. So I'm really not happy about that. So I'm trying a new way, but as you can see, nothing's working. So that's awesome. So, but I want to maybe I have to do this, turn it off and turn it back on. But as we we go through all of this. Let's try it this way. We were right here, weren't we? All right. Let's see if my pencil's going to work now. Because you want to. Oh, there we go. Are we going to actually rejoice in afflictions? We're not going to rejoice in our afflictions. Now, let me talk about this sanctification process. The thing that we talk about on Sunday morning, and we're doing that series right now. The more we grow with God, the more we start to see things as opportunities. Or look what I can do with God. I think if you can seriously sit here and look at me in the eye and say, hey, I can rejoice in afflictions, then you have matured farther than anybody in this room when it comes to sanctification. Is that fair to say? But this is what afflictions does. It produces things. When we go through obstacles, and I think that's a lot what we talked about this past Sunday, we're talking about Joseph. It's not if these things are going to happen, it's when. And let us not forget what we said Sunday, that by being a child of God, by being a Christian, means you are going with God, which means you are going to be fighting upstream, which means you are going to deal with these afflictions along the way. And I think one way to rejoice is saying, when afflictions does happen in your life, you can sit there and say, you know what? I am going the right way. I am going the route that I'm supposed to. Now, understand that we got to realize, make sure there's a difference, and I want to, as we sit here and talk about afflictions, there's a difference between afflictions. I'm just going to give a little versus consequences. I don't have enough room, but think about that. What's the difference between afflictions and consequences?
When you deserve.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think there's a consequence is now that a consequence is something. You're right, that is earned. Now understand that there are good consequences and there can be bad consequences. It depends on the decision and the choice that is made. One thing to take away from this when we talk about consequences is this, and that's what I call the domino effect. Domino effect is like, you must why is this happening? And he's like, well, you made a bad choice here. It's like, well, that was so then. It's like, yeah. It's like when I've asked God for He forgave you, But the thing is, you still got to, because that free will which God gave you to choose whether you're going to follow Him, obey Him, or not. Because of that, you made a choice, and you're dealing with the consequences. And many times you're going to see this decision right here may lead to other issues in your life down the road. The example we used that we used was with we used child. If a young person makes doesn't do things the way that God wants, and they're a teenager and they get pregnant and now they have a child that comes along the way. I mean, you're going to sit there. So the consequences of that action is they're going to have a child. Now, that child's not a bad child or anything because they're born, but that parent's going to have some consequences because they chose to do that when they did that, and things seem to happen down the line. If they're struggling with the career they want, they're struggling with this or this, that consequence is the root of it starts back here when they made this choice. I think sometimes Christians struggle with, and it's not just Christians, humans. We want to say, it's like, well, why is this happening? It's like, well, it's like God had a plan, you sort of got off the road, you sort of got off the path, and you're dealing with this consequence of a decision. Now, how does that relate to an affliction? Take that same child. Well, that same child gets sick, or ill, was out of your control. You might have to deal with an affliction because of that. Because again, it goes back to cause. Consequences is something that you cause. Afflictions is something, you might say, hey, this is there, but affliction is something that you're dealing with and you're going through that. But look what affliction does. Affliction produces what? Endurance. And that is huge. I mean, you just can't get, the more you go through it, the more you know how to handle it. And that's probably a nice way to do it. And the more you do it, the more you know how to handle it. I still remember, and he's not here, I would throw my pencil that sort of works at him. But I remember we were going to go on the 5K last time they had the Fiddler's 5K, right? And we had this whole thing for Jack Watkins and celebrating him, and he had just passed away. We had shirts made up. I hadn't ran in months and months, but I was told that the person that was going to go with me said, "Oh, we'll just walk it together." It's like great. He was supposed to have knee surgery like within a month or so, and so we get out there, and and I'm talking to somebody else, and next thing I know, I can't remember if do they shoot a gun or what? Anybody remember? However it is, they say go, right? We go. He takes off. He's gone. I mean, gone. I mean, running, gone. I'm like, what just happened here, right? I thought we were walking this for Jack. Now we're running it for Chad. So that was something that happened. But and I tell that jokingly, but I tell you what, I was not ready for a 3 miles. I was not ready to go running for 3 miles, and my body told me that for the next 2 to 3 days that I wasn't ready for that run. But this says here that our afflictions that God understand how I say it, that God allows us or tests us to go through, that we deal with, it produces endurance. When it keeps hitting, when it keeps going, you're able to stand there and say, I can handle this because I have endurance. And also, part of that endurance, and I hate to keep going back there, but if you go back to Hebrews, part of your endurance, as it talks about in Hebrews 12, which I think is a good correlation here, run the race that's marked out for you, right? Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, by keeping your eyes fixed on what? Jesus Christ, who's the author and perfecter of our faith, right? The way that you're able to endure is by keeping your focus on Christ. And here's another thing. Think about it this way. One way in which we are also able to endure in all of this goes even farther. And I would say this, that these afflictions that we're dealing with, one way that we're able to endure from those is by you can rejoice. Endurance is going to happen. It happens over and over, but you can rejoice in those afflictions because you're focused on Christ. When you're focused on that, it's like, I'll keep going. I'll keep doing it. I'll keep making it there. I remember a couple years ago we were still working in Kentucky, and I went and did a Bible study at the sports complex that the local high school had. And they had the weight room in there. And in that weight room, they had one of the benches. And, here they are doing, all the weights and everything that going on, the bench press and everything. And they had, like, signs. And, instead of putting stuff on the walls where people could, like, get them excited, they put all the sayings, some people would call that, the newspaper clippings for the week or whatever. If the coach from the other team had said something, they stuck that on the wall or on the ceiling, so when they're getting ready for the next season, they're constantly reminded by what's going on by reading that. And the entire time they're worn out, they're working themselves to death, but they keep going because they see that. And I think the same thing can apply to us, is that when we have afflictions, one way for us to have joy in the middle of those afflictions is for us to, by keeping our eyes focused on Jesus Christ the entire time. Because if that is our focus, then we're like, I can keep looking at that. Because understand, it all goes back to this access part. If I'm looking at Jesus Christ, if I'm looking at Him, I'm seeing my Christ, I'm seeing my King Jesus seated at the right hand of God where I'm supposed to be. And that's why, I'm just going to say this. That's why I think it's not a bad idea to have a visual of what it means to have an access with God. That's sort of what I was getting at there, because it's one of like, man, that looks good. I mean, it's sort of like, you're going to go on vacation, you go look at pictures of those vacations. Well, I would like to go there. I like to go there. If you just read about it, I mean, your imagination go. But to see a visual of it, I mean, it goes even farther. You're able to see what it's really like. Well, I think if we can have a visual representation of Christ and His glory and realize whatever we come up with is not going to be even close to how great it is, right? We understand that. But have a visual of Christ there. Another term or expression I've seen done, we did this when I was growing up in my student ministry when I was a teenager. I remember our youth pastor, we had a chair. We called it the Jesus chair. And it was at the very front of the room. We had an empty chair. Now we had so many jokes with that. It's not even fun. Don't sit on Jesus. But we always made room for Jesus, right? We always make sure we remember Jesus is in the room. Jesus is here with us. Now we all knew Jesus lived inside of us. He wasn't just sitting in this chair, but it was that physical picture for us to say this is what Jesus is. But I think as we go through life, we have to understand by keeping our eyes focused on Jesus, where He is, it allows us to maybe see that joy as we deal with affliction. So let's look at what the next part says here. So if affliction produces endurance, look what happens here. Endurance produces proven character. And I think here's the craziness. It's this endurance means it happens over and over and over. You don't get endurance by one time. And what proven character is going to give you is like your character is going to be, watch how this all works together, sanctified, the process of sanctification to the point is like, I get it. And then you got that proven character that says, no. I've seen God do this over and over. I've seen God work over and over. And so that proven character comes out to you. And that endurance produces proven character, which then goes on, right, to give us proven character produces hope. And that's huge. Let's be honest. What would Christians have if we didn't have the hope of Christ? Nothing. I mean, sometimes we want to bash the people in the Old Testament. Right now, this year, I'm reading through the Old Testament this year, and as I read it, I'm like, man, it's like they were up, and they were down, and they were up, and they were down. But their hope was like, serve God, get blessed. Serve God, get blessed. Our hope is different. Our hope is in Jesus Christ, and that we have eternity waiting for us on the other side. And so I was like, that's a whole different kind of hope, isn't it? I mean, that's a whole, whether just getting rewarded right here or getting rewarded for eternity by being in God's presence. So, but understand that affliction produces, let's go back here, affliction is a whole other thing. Affliction produces endurance. Endurance produces proven character, and proven character produces hope. And it's a hope that we have in Jesus Christ. It's a hope that keeps moving us forward. It's a hope that pushes us on. There are so many times sometimes you wake up and you're like, the only way I'm able to put one foot in front of the other foot is because of the hope I have in Jesus Christ. There's many days like that. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Last night, I was telling something about how I had I was looking at some videos on that I was on doing some Zoom calls. I was telling them, I know some people have come in since then, and I took the Zoom call, and I noticed my head was crooked, right? I mean, and I thought my camera was broken. And so then I looked down at my chair, and I realized that when I pulled my chair up to my desk, one side of the chair was this tall, and the other side of the chair was this tall. I mean, it was. So I said, you know what? It's time for me to go get another chair. Now, I can tell you later about the neck. It didn't fix the neck problem. But so I went to go get the chair last night, and I had to get something for Cameron. I was already up in Cookville getting something for the science project of the year. And so we're getting this science project information, go over to Sam's Club, walk in there, and I looked down at my phone. I was like, it's 8 o'clock. It's like, 7:45. And, I got that look. I don't know if you've got, that look that you get when you walk into a store and, they want to tell you, we're about to close.
Going home.
Yes, so you can wrap this up. And she said, sir, we close in 12 minutes. It's like, it's not 15. Usually around. No, she's like, in 12 minutes. I was like, I'm good, got this. And so I go over there and I'm like, I'm going to get my phone out. I'm going to do the self-checkout, walk over to the door, hold up the receipt, and get out of here in like 5 minutes. Everything stopped working. Between me getting to where I was trying to get the chair, got up there, and, I'm sitting over there, I'm trying to check out. It won't, the credit card starts working, all because I put in the wrong code, and now it's saying that's fraudulent charges, and all this stuff's going on, and then I'm getting so frustrated because Tennessee was getting killed by Florida in the basketball game so much. That's the whole reason I left, to go to Cookville in the first place. So all this stuff was going on, and I was so frustrated. And I'm thinking to myself, like, we all go through this, right? But we all get to that point where, like, you want hope. And I said all that to get to this entire next verse, because I think this is something to really focus in on. Look what it says here. It says, this hope, remember the hope that we have, that comes from affliction, that goes into proven character, that goes into that endurance to proven character, and the hope that we get from all of that, right, will not disappoint us. This is one of those things where they should, like, take this word right here and just put not, as loud and as big as they can, to say, this will not disappoint us. Because think about this. How many times we put our hope in something that has disappointed us? And I think that's something we need to remember. That no matter what we go through, no matter how rough things get, it's going to disappoint us. Things in life will, but God won't. I heard this story on the radio today. I was talking to, I wasn't talking to anybody. They were talking to one of the former Vol on the sports talk. Everybody's talking about Tennessee and how bad we are. I get it. So this guy, he was a former, I think it was Troy Fleming, who used to play. He said, what's it like being a Tennessee fan? And he said, it's like, you love it, but it's like that emoji where you got the head, the shaking the head emoji and the hands over your face, because you just don't want to see what's about to happen next right now. And he said, but because you're a Vol fan, you got that little squint, looking out just a little bit to see what's going to happen next. And I think many times in life, we put our faith in so many other things like this. We know it's going to mess up, but well, maybe it won't this time. But the only thing that won't disappoint us is Jesus Christ. And Kathy and I were sitting here talking earlier about, like, there went the football season next year because everybody just left in the last 30 minutes. But, it's like, there's going to be a football season next year, and there's going to be a football season after that, and after that, but, how much time do we waste on things like that, putting the joys of our life, or the excitement in our life, instead of putting them in Jesus Christ? And I think this is, and I'm going to sort of take it back to the very beginning, and that's through this. Access. If we, I'm just going to write it this way. We just need to look at Jesus. When you're looking at Jesus, things don't seem to be that bad around you. When you're looking at Jesus, it puts things in perspective. It's like, why am I going through my job, which I don't like right now? Which I do like my job, but why am I going through these things in life which I don't like? Why am I doing this? When you're looking at Jesus, it's like, I can handle this stuff. I can handle that stuff, because you're focused on Jesus. And let's be honest, because that's where our hope comes from. And it's not a hope of this world, it's a hope of what's to come. There's a lot of people out there who are looking for hope, and they're not going to find it in this world, because as this passage we've been reading says, everything in this world is going to disappoint us, but the hope of Jesus Christ will not disappoint. So, good words, good words from literally we just went through 4 verses tonight.